Good morning. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I wake you? Good morning. Oh, that feels so much better. Thank you for that, for being patient with me. I always cringe when someone just says that they're going to introduce me. I always appreciate the introduction. Is it? Is this going to go in? Is this? It will. You're saying yes. So you will pay for it if I break it. No, no, no. I don't think. Perhaps someone that's braver than I. By the way, I just wanted to say, whenever I hear my reputation, whenever I hear an introduction of me, I always cringe because it's likely to make you think that somehow I have something to say to you that you don't already know. But I want you to know that whenever I speak to a group like this, I'm so impressed with who you are and what you're doing. I always feel like a lion in a den full of Daniels when I stand before you. And so forgive me as we go. We're going to look at some things in depth, and I will try not to live up to my introduction. I promise to be more calm than that. I have an old friend. He used to be a farmer. Someone that we would call a redneck in Missouri. And whether you know what redneck is or not, it's kind of like hillbilly, you know. And he told me one time he had heard me introduced, and came up to me later, and he said, when I was growing up, there were three things that my dad always told me. First, never try to climb a fence that is leaning toward you. Never try to kiss a girl who is leaning away from you, and never try to live up to your introduction. So I just won't do that. I think that's common wisdom. Has somebody? I don't want to. It's just that I can't hold this and talk at the same time. Oh, you were going to take a picture of it while. I thought he was going to have evidence that I broke it. I have not broken it yet, but. Oh, thank you. They're getting it from the 5th floor, so we should have it by tomorrow. I want to take some time with you talking about a concept that Paul taught us as he taught us about the judgment seat of Christ. He sent us these words: take heed how you build. We sometimes take for granted that we all know and understand our responsibility as we minister in other cultures. But sometimes I'm afraid, and tribal people have said this to me over the years, that the missionaries who came in here were wonderful, and we are so thankful for the work that they did while they were here and the way God blessed through them. And then they'll add this, and they add this apologetically, and they'll add it kindly, but they'll say, having said that, having expressed my thanks, I have to say that I wish that the missionaries had done their homework before they began teaching. I wish that the missionaries had done their homework before they began teaching. We sometimes think that the only homework we have to do is learn the language when we're moving into another culture. But there is much more to reaching another culture than simply learning the other language. And I don't mean to intimidate you at all. These are some things that I'd like you to consider. These are some things that I have seen transform ministries, cross-cultural ministries around the world. And what it amounts to, what we're going to be talking about. Thank you so much, Ben. Yes, oh, look at that. I am sorry to be causing so many problems, especially for Benj. Can you hear me? Can you still hear me? Yeah. How many cannot hear me? How would you know that you couldn't? I mean, you wouldn't even know what I was asking. Silly question. And what we're talking about these 3 days is becoming agents of redemption in a cross-cultural context. Christ has finished the work. The work of redemption is finished. Death, burial, and resurrection. It lies right there. And if we are careful about how we do our job, we know that we're not going in to redeem the culture. We're going in to be agents of redemption, to take that message and use that message to speak deeply into the hearts of the people from another culture. As we begin, I guess before I begin, there's a couple of things that I want to suggest to you regarding tomorrow night, Friday night, and Saturday night. Some of you came up to me when I first got here, and you said to me, "You look familiar." And it's partly because all Americans look alike. I know that, but and it might be because I had a mask on and all you could see was my bald head, and it occurred to you that I know somebody who doesn't have any hair. But how many were here for the missions conference, the last missions conference in 2019, the last face-to-face missions conference in 2019 before COVID struck? All right, that's good to know. And you all did you all raise your hand? I've picked up on that. Only 3 people raised their hand most of the time. But the reason that I look familiar is because I was here in 2019, and I had the privilege of teaching in the mornings like this, a seminar on discipleship and how discipleship most effectively works. They have asked me to teach that discipleship seminar in the evenings to the church. And so you're going to have to sit and listen to it again, and I apologize for that. But what that means is some of the illustrations that we'll be using, some of the things that we actually do, using our hands, you will already know the solution to those things. Can I ask you if you would just kind of step back at times like that and allow the people from the church to discover on their own, because that kind of discovery is the most powerful kind of learning there is. If there are conversations and you already know the answer that we're looking for, involve yourself in the conversation, in the breakout, sit there and talk about it with them, but let them discover. Ask them questions, lead them to the answers, because we want the people in our churches to become as effective in ministering the gospel as the missionaries that they send out. Because perhaps you've been in the neighborhood that surrounds this church. That is a place that is crying for the gospel. And most of us are going to leave here and go far away. But the people who remain behind here in this church will be the ones who will have the opportunity to minister to those folks, and the people down there on the ground level, along the street. I promise they look at the world differently from the way the people of this church look at the world. And so their ministry to them will be cross-cultural. So if I could ask you that this morning, just to do me that favor, that kindness, I would appreciate that. I also want to say that as we go this morning, you may have a question. I may make a comment and you're going to say, "What? I can't." I am okay with that. But would you just jot the question down? Use 2 or 3 words to say, "I think Jay was wrong because he's," and then if you can phrase it as a question, if you want to say, "I think you were wrong because," I'm okay with that too. But if you have a question, jot it down, because I will stop occasionally and we'll just do Q&A. And if there's something on your mind, something on your heart, I would be glad to listen to you. Would we be breaking significant rules if people took off their, no, would we? Somebody back there cannot do that. No, see, worldview. Walang problema daw kung if you just alisin na lang ang yung mask. Kung gusto, Okay, how many don't want to take off their mask? We'll go with that. So if you have a question, please just jot it down. And as we go, I'll stop and ask if there are any questions. And I don't want you to have the moment where, I had a question, but I don't remember what it was. And because really we want this to be a forum. I want to learn from you while I'm here. I mean that. Everywhere I go, I want to learn. And so if you would help me with that and we can sort things out that way, that would be excellent. Having said that, there are some pictures here that I want you to look at. But I'm going to anticipate that they're going to be unlike any other pictures you have ever looked at a missions conference. We all know the kind of pictures we typically look at or videos we look at. They're ministry things, but these pictures are going to be unlike that. As we scroll through the pictures, as I scroll through the pictures, please take the time to tell yourself the story that the pictures tell. I won't go through them quickly, but they represent a story. As you see the pictures, tell yourself the part of the story that the picture represents. And I'd like it if we could actually worship in silence as we look at the pictures. Would you look at them with me? The message of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the single most life-altering message that has ever been preached here on planet Earth. It changes lives more profoundly than any other message that has ever been proclaimed. That is the message that we long to proclaim, that we long to share with every people group on the planet. Would you agree with that? Those pictures represented something to you, didn't they? They spoke to you because you understood what was going on in the picture. You understood the things that the pictures, the things that were accomplished by the pictures and the things that the pictures portrayed. But not everyone from around the planet, not everyone from around the world, not every people group would look at those pictures and interpret them in the same way or understand them in the same way. When we proclaim the gospel, when we tell the story of the gospel to a group of people, we take several things for granted. And I'd like to just suggest that we take for granted that the hearer shares our understanding of the nature and character of God. We take for granted that he shares our understanding of righteousness, that he shares our understanding of what sin is, that he shares our understanding that he himself is hopelessly sinful, that he shares our understanding of inevitable judgment and inescapable eternal punishment, that he shares our understanding of heaven and hell, that he shares our understanding of the death of a sacrificial substitute, that he shares our understanding of what it means to believe, that he shares our understanding of forgiveness and grace. And we take that for granted as we go. If you're sitting next to somebody on the bus and you talk about sin or heaven or hell or substitutionary death, you are taking for granted that that person understands what you mean as you use those terms. The list of the things that we take for granted goes on. And can I suggest something to you this morning? That's a lot to take for granted. When you move from one culture into another, that is a lot to take for granted. That would be a lot to take for granted if we were sharing the message with a member of our own culture. I hope you do that from time to time. I hope that you share the message of the gospel with the people you went to college with that you know were not believers back then. You suspect they're not believers now. Even though we share a common culture and background, there is no guarantee, listen, even though we share a common culture and background, there's no guarantee that we share a common understanding of the basic pieces of the gospel message. One American that I talked to, we were waiting for a flight. Our flight was delayed. We were here in the Philippines, and he and I just kind of sat next to each other. And while we were sitting next to each other, I took it upon myself. I saw this as an opportunity. I'm not going anywhere. He's not going anywhere. So let's talk about Jesus. Let's just take a few minutes to do that. And I began to share with him the gospel. And I talked about sin, and he agreed with me wholeheartedly. We're all sinners. I talked about God's judgment, and he was beginning to agree. Yes, we deserve to die because of our sin. We deserve punishment, and he and I are right on the same level, same plane. It's clear to me that he's not a believer by some of the things that he's saying, but we are at the same place. And then finally, he said to me, because I asked, when you get to heaven, and you stand before God, and God says to you, why should I let you into my heaven? What will you say to him? And he said, really? He said, I just want you to know that when we get to heaven, we're going to recognize God right away. And I said, okay, I agree with that. I don't think we're going to get to heaven and say, okay, now which one's God? I think it's going to be really, really clear who God is as he sits there on his throne. But he said, we're going to recognize God right away. And I said, well, how will we recognize God? I agree with you, but how will you recognize God? He said, I will recognize God because he will be the one sitting in a rocking chair with a big G on his sweatshirt. And I said, does G stand for God or for Grandpa? And he said, Grandpa. I said, well, okay. Then what? He said, God is going to look at me and he's going to kind of lean down from his throne and he's just going to pat me on my head like this. And he's going to say, yeah, you were very, very naughty. You know how grandpas do it, right? You were very, very naughty, but that's okay because I know you tried. So why don't I'm just going to let you into my heaven. And I thought, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, how can he picture God like that? Paul would call that, and this is a quote from the New Testament, pretentious thoughts that protect us from the knowledge of God. That's what he was doing. He assumed, and I'm sure he's heard, that God is different than that God is angry at sin, that God punishes sinful people. I'm sure he's heard that, but he's come up with a whole new way of looking at it that protects him from that knowledge. I don't have to worry about that because God is really just a grandpa type who's going to sit there. He had misunderstood God. Would you agree with me? He had misunderstood God. And probably intentionally he had misunderstood God. He made that up so that he didn't have to worry about standing before God. And so I took the time to actually tell him a Bible story. I told him the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and God's judgment falling there on those sinful people. We didn't talk about homosexuality or anything else. I just told him the story. And I said to him, listening to you with this big G on his sweatshirt, grandpa kind of a God, I bet the people of Sodom and Gomorrah would be surprised and maybe even offended if they heard you talk like that, because that is not how they ultimately understood God. And I wish I could say that he had a transformation and that he was gloriously saved. I took the time to share the gospel with him, and I had to leave it with him because now the plane is leaving and off we go. I don't know where that man is today. I know he was on his way to Amsterdam, and I don't know if he's still there. We take for granted that people understand things the way we do. My message of the gospel and substitutionary death, well, it's going to mean nothing to him because what's the point? If God is just the grandpa type and he's going to let you into heaven anyway, then I don't have to believe anything that you're saying. I I want to read something to you. Would it be okay if I did that? It's not a long passage, but I want to read it, and then I have a couple of questions, all right? Judd was placed in a holding cell. He knew the global community officials wanted to scare him. When they finally brought Judd upstairs, he gave them his name and where he was from. "Where is your passport?" the GC officer said. "It's probably back at the hotel," Judd said. "And where is the item you had locked in the hotel safe?" "What item?" Judd asked. The man tilted his head and looked over his glasses. "Mr. Thompson, we can make this as easy or as difficult as you wish." "I don't know where it is," Judd said. "That's the truth." "Who is in possession of it?" "A friend." Who is this young friend that you're talking about?" And the man described Ryan. I don't understand," Judd said. "I come here to tell you about a murder you're investigating, and now I'm the bad guy. What's up with that?" Okay, you got it? I realize I didn't read it very excitingly, but you have the story so far? Let me ask you a question. Who is Judd Thompson? Who's Judd Thompson? Oh, okay. Well, what is the global community? Okay. What was locked in the safe? And why was Judd so concerned about it? Really? Well, this is distressing to me. Who had been murdered? I'm sorry. Is there some way that you could get to know this? No, there's no way to get to know who Judd Thompson is. There's a way. How could you, if you really wanted to know who Judd Thompson is, what was locked in the safe, who had been murdered, how would you go about finding that out? You would ask to borrow the book, wouldn't you? It's part of the Left Behind series. But when I take a story out of the middle, just pull it out of context and share the story with you, it may be the most important story in the world, but if you don't have the context, the story doesn't make sense to you. I hope you understand what I mean by that. The story doesn't make sense to you. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important to use a storying approach when you teach. I'm hoping to get far enough to talk about using storying and how storying actually works. If we don't have time, then we'll set a time to get together at some time in the future. But it is so important that people understand the context of your message. The Bible works that way everywhere. I see this all the time. People will come to me, they pull a verse out of context and they'll say, "What does this verse mean? What is this talking about?" And I always suggest the same thing. Can you help me to remember what it is that I suggest? You're going to have to look at that verse in context. You have to know what Paul has already talked about and what he's about to talk about, because that's what gives sense to the verse that you just read. And God's word is powerful, but especially when we interpret it in context, because that's where the truth resides. So having said that, let's do this. The differences, that possible misunderstanding becomes probable misunderstanding when we attempt to minister cross-culturally. The differences from one culture to another are never superficial. The differences from one culture to another are never superficial. Let me see if I can illustrate that. When I say God, and someone with a different worldview says God, we don't mean the same thing. We don't mean the same thing. When we say God and a Hindu says God, we don't mean the same thing at all. When we say sin and someone from a different culture says sin, we don't mean the same thing. When we say righteousness, when we say judgment, when we say punishment, judgment, when we say punishment, when we say heaven, hold on a second. When we say heaven and someone from a different culture says heaven, we don't mean the same thing. When we say hell, don't say hell, but you know what I mean by that. When we say hell and someone from a different culture says hell, we don't mean the same thing. When we say sacrifice, sacrificio in conversation with someone down there on the street doesn't mean the same thing as sacrificio from the Bible. I hope that we understand that. When we say forgiveness, when we say grace, when we say believe, we don't mean the same thing as a person from another culture means when they say believe. Now, if you think about those things, that was a long list, and I know they just kept popping up there in your face. But when you think about those things that were on the screen, they are the basics of the message of the gospel. And if they're confused about one of those terms, ultimately they're going to be confused about the entire message. If they're confused about 2 of those, 5 of those, if all of those terms in their culture, and keep in mind, this is not a language problem. It's not a language problem. Among the Bukalot, nanotavaak, I am a believer. Nanotava is the word for believe. Nanotavaak, I believe, not isut, I believe in Jesus. But when they say that, they don't mean exactly what I mean when I translate it to English. I believe in Jesus. It's different for them. Their understanding of that word believe is different from my understanding of that word believe. And if any of those things are askew, if any of those things are crooked in their understanding, if any of those things are different than what you meant to communicate, then at the end, your message, your entire message, falls into question. Because you said words that they understood, but they understood those words differently from what you intended. And so now we're going to say, if you want to believe in Jesus, just raise your hand. I see this all the time in the Philippines. Some evangelist will come from the United States. He'll go into this, and there's a huge congregation, a huge group of people out there, and he'll quickly go through the bits and pieces of the gospel. And then he'll say, if you want to believe in Jesus, please raise your hand. And whenever I hear that, I sit back and I cringe. Because I say to myself, this man doesn't know how mabait yung mga Pilipino are. You people are so nice. And now I'm standing in front and saying, if you want to believe in Jesus, just raise your hand. And you think to yourselves, people in the audience think to themselves, wow, this American, he came from all the way over there in the United States, and it cost him a lot of money, and he just shared this message with us, and all he wants me to do is raise my hand? Ah, how shameful would it be if I don't raise my hand? And now I'm thinking, because I'm the American, I'm thinking, oh, all of these people have gotten saved. No, all of these people are nice, and they don't want to shame themselves by not being nice to you when you've been so nice to them. It's cultural assumptions that undo us in the end. We forget how worldview works. Now, possibly you might be thinking, if he doesn't understand the basic ideas of the gospel, how could he understand the gospel itself? If he interprets righteousness differently from you, if he interprets grace differently, if he interprets substitutionary death differently from you, how can he actually understand the gospel? And I'd just like to say, I'm not trying to be unkind. Forgive me if I'm coming across that way. But I'd just like to say that if there's any bits and pieces of his understanding that are missing, then it is very likely that he will not understand your message. He will not understand your message. And that's why we've set this time aside. I want to talk to you this morning about the importance of understanding the worldview of the people to whom we're ministering. Worldview lies at the core of every people group on the planet, except the one where you're working. Did you hear me say that? Worldview lies at the core of every people group on the planet, except for the one that you're working with. Does anybody have any objection to me saying that? Please object. Including the group that you're working with. Their worldview lies at their very core. And we're going to recreate that chart that we created on Sunday morning as we go here. And we're going to talk about some of those bits and pieces. But worldview lies at the core. And because my worldview is different from your worldview, I know that you're going to interpret what I say in light of your worldview, not in light of my worldview. We'll come to that. But worldview shapes and drives the way they look at their world. It shapes and drives the decisions that they make, and it plays the key role in determining whether they'll understand and believe the message of the gospel. It doesn't help to believe something that you don't understand. Can I say that again? It doesn't help to believe something that you don't understand. You must understand the message before you can believe it in a way that's going to change your life, that's going to transform your life. Most of you today, I'm going to guess, either work cross-culturally or you provide leadership for people who work cross-culturally. Would that be true this morning? Either you work cross-culturally or you provide leadership for other people who work cross-culturally. There's going to be two different takeaways from this time that we have together. If you work cross-culturally, I'm hoping you'll grab the principles for yourself, that you'll begin to apply them in your ministry. If you lead people who work cross-culturally, I hope you'll grab the principles for the people that you lead so that you can help them to understand how important it is that they understand worldview. That makes it vitally important, I believe, for us to understand how worldview works. Because in any culture, the church is impaired to the degree that the gospel is misconstrued. The church is impaired to the degree that our message is misunderstood. I worked with a tribal, some missionaries who were planting churches among a tribal group in Ecuador. This is several years ago, maybe as much as 20 years ago. I'm not sure. I lose track. Something about my head being uncovered like this. I forget things. But I was working with that group, and they were looking for. They came to me. They asked me for my help because they were struggling to get the people to go out as missionaries. You know, we have Christians, we have believers, we have churches, we have leadership in the churches, but the churches are just not catching the vision of taking the message out. And so I went in there. We did a consultation with them, which was about a 5-day process. Church leaders were there, believers were there, unbelievers were there. And as we worked through it down there in Ecuador, one of the questions that I asked is, how can I be saved? Let's just imagine that I come to you and I say, I know that you came here with the message of the gospel. I know that you want me to be saved. I'm not sure what that means, but how can I be saved? And I sat there, and the church leaders, forgive me for this, but the church leaders began to say, oh, well, you need to start coming to church, and you need to start doing the right things. You need to stop smoking. You need to stop drinking. You need to... I sat there 10 minutes and listened to the message that they were proclaiming, and nobody said anything about death, burial, and resurrection. And so I turned to the people who were with me, the missionaries that were there in conference later when I wrote up my recommendations. I said, I don't even know how to say this, but I don't think these people are believers. And it's a good thing that they're not going out as missionaries with the message that they gave me. Because you would have confusion everywhere these people live, everywhere these people go. Well, what should we do? And I said, well, I'd go back to the beginning. I would start over and use a storying approach to help them to understand the worldview of the Bible so that they could embrace it. Because here's the deal, and this is so profound. You can't have a church where you don't have believers. Forgive me for being that obvious, but you can't have a church where you don't have believers, and you can't have believers where the gospel has not been clearly preached. You can't have a church where you don't have believers, and you can't have believers where the gospel has not been clearly preached. And I can hear you now. I'm always careful to preach a clear message. Please forgive me if I imply something else to you, or if you're able to infer something else. I am not saying that you don't understand the gospel. I am not saying that you don't preach a clear message. What I'm trying to say is that the message that you mean to convey, the message that you mean to give to other people is almost always different than the message that they receive. Let me say that again. The message that you convey, the message that you give, is almost always different than the message that they receive. What leaves your mouth changes when it gets to their ears. What leaves your mouth changes when it gets to your ears. And I'm gonna suggest that what they hear is more important than what you say. What they hear is more important than what you say. I am sure you are preaching a clear gospel. I am sure you are conveying the truth of God's word. But I can't be sure. Among the Bukalot, I was never sure that what they were hearing was what I meant to communicate. They filter everything through their own worldview. There's a difference between reality and perception. And you can see that the reality, I tried to make it colorful for those of you who love colors. Reality is blue and kind of light blue. You saw that over there. And you said it to them, and it was clear, and it was blue, and it was beautiful. And then it went through the filter of their worldview, and by the time it came out, it had turned red and orange, because reality is different than perception. And at the end of the day, you've heard this said, perception is reality. The way you perceive something is what's real and true. And I can illustrate that perhaps for you. Are you ready? What do you see? 5 fingers. Well, I would say 4 fingers and a thumb, but okay, I'm with you so far. I agree, 5 fingers, 4 fingers and a thumb. What else do you see? Describe it. Hand, okay, yeah, that's what I can see too. All right, what else? A thumb, okay, yep, I do as well. What else? What else do you see? Tell me what you see. The back, oh. Yeah, no, I don't see that. I don't see that. You know what some people say at this point? They'll say hair. But there's no hair on my hand. Sometimes they say fingernails. But there's no fingernails on my hand. Do you know why I'm saying that? Because I'm looking from over here. No hair, no fingernails, nothing. It's just, oh, I see what you were saying. Now that I look at it from this way, I can understand why you said the things that you did. It's a foolish example, forgive me. But perception is reality. And when you start talking about fingernails as being important, and I'm looking at that, I'm going to say, yep, there are no fingernails on that hand, because it passed through my perception. And perception always alters when it passes through. Reality always alters. Truth always alters. Truth always changes when it passes through the worldview of the person that you're talking to. That's happening. Oh, and I hate to say this. I hate to even admit it. That's happening right now. I'm speaking, and I'm saying things that I believe are real and true and that are important to cross-cultural ministry, but I can't be sure that you're actually getting it and you're understanding it, but I can't be sure that the understanding I meant to convey is the actual understanding that you have right now. I can't be certain that you understand what I mean. You speak English, so you understand what I say, but that doesn't mean that you understand what I mean, that it's having the same impact on you. I can only be certain that you understand what you think I mean. You still with me? I can only be certain that you understand what you think I mean. You understand this if you've been married longer than 20 minutes. How many here are married and not ashamed to admit it? Okay, 3 people again. Wow. It's the same 3 people every time. Thank you for raising your hand at times like that. I'll just say this, if you're married, if you haven't had this experience, then because you're not married, then well, get ready because you understand it if you've been married longer than 20 minutes. You're in a conversation with your wife, and she says, "Well, you said that." Now, I'm not mimicking ladies or making fun of you, but you said that. And have you ever heard yourself say, "Yes, that's what I said, but that's not what I meant. I didn't mean that. What you understanding? No, I did not. I said that you probably shouldn't. That maybe we shouldn't have ice cream tonight. I did not say that you were fat and ugly." Well, that's what you meant. No, that is not what I meant. I meant that it's kind of late in the day and we're both a little lactose intolerant, so maybe we shouldn't have but I'm still in trouble. I've been loving and I've been gentle and I've been concerned, but I'm in trouble because of what she understood, what she inferred from what I said. Because she didn't hear what you said, she heard her interpretation of what you said. And just so we're clear, gentlemen, your wives are not alone in this. We men do exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. We make inferences, we infer from what she says. That's the difference between imply and infer, okay? There are times when I say things and I'm actually implying, you really shouldn't have ice cream. I would never say that to my wife, but I'm implying that. And sometimes my wife catches me implying things. But there are other times when she infers, she thinks I'm trying to, she thinks I'm not. And I don't know how many conversations we've had where I've said to her, could you just go by what I've said? And that never works. Because it's her interpretation of what I've said that matters. So in the end, my ability to communicate with you during the seminar depends on how well I know you. How well I can anticipate how you will understand the things that I say. And it depends on how successful I am at adjusting to what I know about you. It is not how well I know my topic. It's how well I know you and how well I adjust to your thinking that determines the degree of communication. I may know my topic better than anybody else in the whole world knows it. But if I don't present it in a way that's adjusted to the way you think, it will mean little or nothing to you. And so you might walk out those doors at the end, and I can't prevent this. And if you need to do, and somebody's going to say to you, oh, were you in a seminar? Oh, yeah, it was about worldview. How was the seminar? Eh. I need a nap. I don't know how you're going to respond. But it will be based on your evaluation. And the only way I can prevent that is to anticipate that based on the way that you look at the world. I know you've listened to lectures by intelligent people, by professors, and by the time they got to the end of their lecture, they simply did not connect with you. They just didn't. It doesn't mean that they're not well educated. It doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. It doesn't mean that they don't know more about that topic than anybody else in the world. It just means that they didn't connect with you at the end of the day. And that remains true constantly when I'm ministering cross-culturally. The only difference is it is much more difficult to know my audience. When I'm speaking in the Lake of the Ozarks there, and we have people there that are rednecks. Somebody asked me one time, what's the difference between a redneck and a hillbilly? And I always say you can find it on their Facebook page. Go to their Facebook page, and if the picture has them dressed in camouflage with a rifle in their hand and the head of a deer in their hands, that's a redneck. Because that's core to their being. When hunting season starts there in Camdenton, Missouri, when hunting season starts, people they stay away from church. Not because they hate God or are not interested, but that's time to hunt. I'm going to go out and kill something. That's what they're going to do. And some of you, I can see it in your eyes. You're sitting there going, oh, that's awful. Why would you kill a deer? Well, it's because you look at the world differently than they do. Some years ago, an excellent Bible teacher. If he were to come here, you would be absolutely thrilled with his Bible teaching, his teaching of God's word. An excellent Bible teacher came to the tribe. And while he was visiting among the Bukalot, we were, ministering there, and the Bukalot church leaders came to me and said, would he speak to us on Sunday morning? Will he please? And I said, absolutely. I do believe he'll speak to us. And they said, well, and so I went to him and I said, would you share God's word with us this morning? And he said, oh, absolutely. I'd love to do that. But how? I don't speak the language. I said, here's how we're going to do this. You just say the first sentence, the first phrase, and pause, and then I'll translate it. And then you say that, and I'll keep up with you. We'll just go back and forth. And by the time we're done, they'll understand what you're talking about. He said, oh, great. So he got up in front of the church when it's time to speak, and thank you so much. I'm glad you, blah, blah, blah. The thing that you always say at the beginning before you start speaking. And then he said, because this is the beginning of his message, scientists tell us that an object traveling the speed of light. And he stopped. Then I said, you're going to have to give me a minute. So I said, what he's saying, and I said this in Bukala, what he's saying is that there are these really, these people that have insight, these people that really understand. And they say that an object that is, I know that you think that light either is or isn't, either there is light or there isn't light, it's light or it's dark, but light actually goes. And I had a flashlight and I said, if I push this button, see that red dot? It's over there on the wall. The light actually goes from here all the way over there. And it goes very fast. Look at how fast it goes, so very, very fast, incredibly fast. And I said, he's saying that if an object, well, nothing can go as fast as light goes, but if there was something that could go as fast as light goes, and then I turned back to him and I said, I think they've got it. And then he said, and light travels almost 300,000 kilometers in 1 second. Okay. I said, he's saying that light just goes very, very fast and, and handed it back to him. And he said, in fact, and this is my favorite part, light goes so fast that it could actually travel around the earth 23 times in 1 second. And I said, I'm going to need some more time with this. I know, I said to the Bukalot, I know that you think the world is flat. The world is not flat. The world is actually round. It's like a basketball. Great big basketball. I mean, a really big basketball. And we kind of live like right here on the basketball. But, don't worry. We're not going to fall off because, anyway, it's big. It takes a long time to go all the way around the world. And what he's saying is if light could go, light can't actually go around the corner like that, but if it could, then it could go around the earth. And then I turned it back to him and I said, okay, go ahead. And I could see it in their eyes. I was feeling exactly the same way. I actually have forgotten everything else that he said. And I mean that. I translated all of it. I have forgotten everything else that he said, and I know the Bukalot forgot everything else because they left that meeting saying, light goes and the earth is round. I mean, that was not the message he meant to convey. But that's the one that they got because he didn't speak to their worldview. He didn't take their worldview, and that is an extreme example. But please understand that that happens every time we speak cross-culturally. What we have here, son, is a serious failure to communicate. That's what that was. It wasn't that he didn't know the truth, and it wasn't that it wasn't a good message. I appreciated the message because I heard it in English, but by the time I got it translated into their language, it was just a mess. I have to be able to predict how their worldview will twist and change the truth I plan to teach them. It's not how well I know my topic and how well I adjust to your thinking that determines the degree of... I must have pushed this button. Oh, no, I guess I didn't. And I'd like it if we could take an example from bow fishing. Anybody here do any bow fishing? You stand on the boat and you shoot an arrow into the water that's attached to the... Anybody? Nobody? This is very common where I come from there in the Ozarks. This is a very redneck thing to do. But perhaps this won't mean anything to you. This means a whole lot in the Ozarks in their worldview. If you shoot, listen to me, if you stand on the edge of the water and you shoot the arrow at where the fish appears to be, you will miss the fish. Because of the refraction of the water, the fish is not where it appears to be. You have to shoot above the fish. You have to shoot at not the fish. You have to shoot near the fish in order to actually hit the fish because the water refracts the light. That's what worldview does. It twists, it refracts your message. And your message actually hits a different place than you intended. Water bends the light. If I anticipate how my message is going to be twisted, then I can actually adjust. I can use that knowledge to plan my teaching so that they understand what I want them to understand. I know what I want them to understand, but if I understand their worldview, I can speak in a way that makes it possible for them to understand what I want them to understand. The true measurement of my success as a teacher, the true measurement of my success as a teacher is not what I say, but what I communicate. Not what I say, but what I communicate. And we need to learn to think in terms of outcome rather than output, of progress rather than presentation, and of transformation rather than information. I want to be sure that the message that I preach changes them in significant ways. And the only way I can do that, I can't get there by measuring. I sometimes will sit with mission. No, let's do it this way. I sit down with a dad and we're having a conversation. We've gone out to lunch together and we're having a conversation. And I'll ask the dad, do you believe that your son understands a good work ethic? And he'll say, oh yeah, my son understands a good work ethic. And I'll ask, well, why? Why would you say that? How do you know? Oh, because I told him this, and I told him this, and I told him this, and I told him this. That's all output. Do the people that you're working with understand the book of Ephesians? Oh, yes. Well, what? Because I taught this, and I taught this, and it's not what I say. That's not the measurement. The measurement is the change, the transformation that takes place in their lives as a result. How will I know whether that son has a good work ethic? How can I know? I can invite him over to my house and I can say, the yard needs to be cleaned up and I will pay you $15 an hour because that's minimum wage in the United States now. I will pay you $15 an hour to clean up my yard. And then I go in the house. And 2 hours later, I come out. The leaves are still down. The trees are still broken. He hasn't done anything. I'm going to suggest that no matter what that father said about the boy, it's not true because it's not observable in his life. And we'll talk much more about this as we go. Oh my God, I don't know who's doing that to my watch, but stop it. Someone's making my watch run much faster than time allows. Let's stop here. Take a breath. Does anybody have any questions? Comments? Insertions? Yeah, I know that's right because, or yeah, I know that's wrong because. Questions at all? Yes. Rather than an illustration, let me just say this because we will come to this. Our message never changes. Death, burial, and resurrection never changes. There is no other way to be saved. But the vehicle that the gospel rides in is going to be different from one culture to the other. If you're a tribal person, the trail that the gospel walks to the center of your heart will be a different trail than the trail that it walked to get to the center of my heart as an American child when I was growing up in the United States of America. And maybe that's just a teaser, but we'll come back to that if that's okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, let's take on the problem of worldview. And these things that you're expressing, these are worldview problems. As you're moving from your worldview to theirs, and can I just say this? Thank you. Thank you for being concerned about that. Because I've been in the center of so many minutes, as I've done consultant work over the years, church planting consulting and worldview consulting, I've gotten into so many places where it is so clear that they never took any of these things into account. They never even thought about this. They just came with a message. The best way that I could describe it is let's say I've got a headache. I do not have a headache, so you don't have to do the thing to my nose. Let's just say that I have a headache and I go to the doctor and I say, "Oh, doctor, I have such a headache." And he's sitting there at the desk and listening to me and he says, "All right, come back tomorrow. We'll put you in the hospital and we'll take out 1/2 meter of your colon." What? Well, we'll take out 1/2 meter of your colon. Okay, I don't understand why we're going to do that. Well, that's because that's what I do. I'm a doctor who works on colons. So you come in and I'll take out 1/2 meter of your... Doctor, I have a headache. Yes, but what I do is I take out people's colons. And so you come in, and I'm going to say, wait a minute. I appreciate that your job is to take out people's colons. You are not going to take my colon, because please, can you help me with my headache? Well, no, can't help you with the headache. We do that in ministry. We do that in ministry. We have this preordained program that we use. And we go into that people group and we use that preordained program because that's what we do. But what if I go to a doctor and he says, and I say, "I have a headache. Can you help me with the headache?" And he says, "Yes, come back tomorrow and we will run some tests." Right? And now I go and I have the tests, and 2 days later I'm sitting with the doctor and he says to me, "Jay, I'm concerned about the headache. I think it's tied to something else because as part of the scans that we did, it appears that you have a significant amount of cancer in your colon. And so you need to come back in. We need to do this surgery right away. Let's get this done." And I know more tests would be needed at that point. But do you see the difference between those two things? He takes the time to do the diagnosis. And then when he says to me, "Here's what we have to do," I'm going to be much more open to that because he spoke to the issue. He took the time to get to know me before he just started operating. And those of us who are working cross-culturally need to do the same thing. We need to take time to get to know the people that we're working with and how they already look at the world, because they will interpret, they will understand your message in light of how they look at the world, not in light of how you look at the world. So you can't go in with a preordained program. You have to make sure that you understand the way they look at the world. And it's actually right here in the notes, so your question was extremely timely. I can't teach him if I don't understand him. And you remember how on Sunday morning, maybe I hope you didn't sleep through that, but I know we didn't finish the story at all, but I was trying to set the stage for your time, for the discipleship time, and then for this coming Sunday morning, we'll get up and we'll talk about what it means to reach the world, what that actually looks like, culture to culture. You remember I told you that I'm walking through the forest with a Bukalote man, and we're laughing and we're having a go. Oh, they love to joke. They're loud. I fit right in there. It's just so fun being with them. And we're laughing and we're joking and we're talking loud, and we get to the edge of the garden and he spins around and he says, "Shh." And actually, there were people who came up to me at lunch on Sunday. Thank you. That sounds good. There were people who came up to me at lunch on Sunday and said, "So," oh man, I am so sorry to do that to you. I always feel badly for our tech team at church when something happens, because they're in full panic mode and I just keep talking. Anyway, the people. So if it falls in the coffee, would that be bad for it? I should drink the coffee here. Baka ganyan. Maybe we can... Dali? Sige. Salamat. I had people come up to me at lunch and say, "So why do you have to be quiet in the garden?" Well, that's what I wanted to do with you this morning. I'd hoped to get a little further than we actually have. Tomorrow morning, we'll talk about why you have to be quiet in the garden, and I'll show you how to use that diagram. But please understand that I'm not talking about changing the gospel in any way. I am not talking about changing the gospel in any way. In fact, if I hear you change the gospel, I promise I will go American on you. I will. I will just get in your face and say, "Stop that right now." But I mean, I appreciate good pakikisama, but you leave the gospel intact. Nobody in any part of this world ever gets saved by anything other than the message that Jesus died for you, he was buried for you, he rose again for you. You are supposed to be punished for your sin, but Jesus was punished for your sin. You were supposed to die for your sin, but Jesus has died in your place. That is the message of the gospel, and that must remain intact. That has to stay at the core of your message. I'm not talking about the gospel, changing the gospel in any way. But let's think about this. Buddhists, for example. One of the basic tenets of the Buddhist worldview is that we should live dispossessed. We should not have possessions and things that we own, because it is possessions and the ownership of possessions that creates the lack of peace, the chaos, the havoc in my life. And so the people who are the most advanced, the people who are nearest to nirvana in their approach to life, are those who maintain this meditative calm 24/7. And the closer you come to achieving that, that's why they dispossess themselves when they become lams. When they go into the monastery, the Buddhist monastery, they dispossess themselves, and the ones who are most successful at the end of the day at not having been angry or agitated or troubled, that is closest to nirvana and the most evolved. The greatest among us are those who are at the most peace. So what happens when I sit down with a Buddhist and say, God is angry at you because of your sin? God is angry at you because, what am I saying about God? We all know that's true. We all know that says things about God to us. But what does that say to a Buddhist person about God? God is angry. Don't be afraid. It's not a crooked question. I'm not going to make a fool of you. What does that mean to a Buddhist person if I say God is angry? What does that say about God? He's not very evolved, is he? I mean, he hasn't managed to be dispossessed. He certainly hasn't achieved nirvana, because he's all agitated. He's all worked up. He's all angry. And now, because they have that image, everything else that I say about God is going to be in that light. That's how they're going to interpret it. Yeah, well, God feels this way, but God doesn't really have it all together. Let me ask you this question. In order for me to be saved, do I have to believe that God is angry? In order for me to become a believer and a follower of Jesus, do I have to believe that God is angry? Weigh in. Do I have to believe that God is angry? What's that? He's angry at sin, but do I have to believe that in order to come to faith in Christ? No. And the reason that I say that is because it's not a component. It's not a part of the gospel. God is going to punish me for my sin, and I need to know that, but I don't need to know that God is angrily going to punish me. And so when I'm talking to a Buddhist, forgive me, I'm not going to talk much about God being angry. But in reference to this thing that we were talking about before, this other group of people who are offended by the fact that God would punish a good man for the sin of a bad man, that shows that God is unjust. When I say that God punished Jesus for my sin, what kind of reaction is that going to draw from some of the people groups on planet Earth? They're going to object to it. But here's the question. Do I have to believe that God punished Jesus for my sin in order to be saved? Yes. Yes. It is an essential part of the gospel. Do you see what we did there? Let me just describe it this way, and I'm sorry. Is it 10:30 that we finish or 11:30? It's 11:30 that we finish. Look at your. So don't you be pushing me to finish here. Let me put it this way. Maybe you will call me on the phone after this is going to be my phone, because it looks a little bit like a cell phone if you think about it. Maybe you will call me on the phone after I leave here, and you're going to say, "Hey Jay, I'm going to be in the United States, and would it be possible for us, my family, to come and visit you?" Here's the deal. I promise that I'll say yes. I'm not always in the country. I'm out of the country almost as much as I'm in the country. But if I'm going to be there and we don't already have people staying at the house, you are more than welcome. Feel free to call me. We'd be glad to host you and just talk about God and cross-cultural ministry. I'm going to be in the States, and can I come and visit you? And I'll say, sure, absolutely. You're probably going to have a follow-up question. What would your follow-up question be? What's that? Am I going to be in the country? And I'll say, yes, I'm going to be in the country. What is it that you need to know before you can come and visit me at my house? Where is my house? Where is your house? And I live on something called Outback Loop. Our yard in the morning when we wake up, there are rabbits running in the yard. There are deer, literally 5 or 6 deer that have bedded down for the night, and they're just getting up and stretching and, heading off in another direction. We have turtles in our yard. We have squirrels in our yard. We have snakes in our yard sometimes too, but I don't want you to be worried about that. We have groundhogs. I don't know if you know what a groundhog is, but they're fun to look at. I mean, we are out in the middle of nowhere. And because it's Outback Loop, the directions to my house, the end of the directions to my house are always the same. Always the same. Because you come down to Outback Loop, and literally Outback Loop goes by our house, and now you're going back. You're going back where you came from. It loops around. Our house is at the top of Outback Loop, and so the end of the directions to my house are always the same. But you're going to have, if you ask me the question, where is your house? Can you give me directions? And you know what I'm going to say? Yes, I am an expert on where my house is. But I'm going to have a question for you. What am I going to ask? Where are you coming from? Does that make a difference? And if you say, oh, kilala ninyo kami. Taga Manila kami. We're coming from Manila. We're coming from Manila. You know what I'm going to be able to say? I know the whole trip. I know exactly I know where the airport is in Manila. I know how to tell you how to get there. And then you can fly. But the directions for someone coming from Manila is going to be different than the directions for someone coming from Riyadh. Yes? And once you get into the States, if you're coming from Kansas City, Missouri, or St. Louis, Missouri, or Springfield, Missouri, the beginning of the directions are going to be different for you than for someone else, while the end of the directions will always remain the same, because there is only one way to get to my house. Do you see the parallel? The same thing is true of the gospel. I've just landed in your village. I'm starting to learn to speak your language. If I don't take the time to understand how you look at the world, how you think about the world, then I won't know where to start. I know where to end. It ends with the gospel. And when a Bukalot gets saved, he gets saved because he believes that Jesus died for him, that he was buried, and that he rose again. When an American gets saved, he gets saved because he believes that Jesus died for him, he was buried, and he rose again. But the Bukalot and the American are going to start at very different places. And the trail that they will walk to get home to the gospel will be different than the trail you walked to get to the gospel. Is that clear at all? Directions to my house. And this is where this comes in. I'm assuming, at least at this point, that you are convinced of the need to understand the worldview of another people group. I hope if you're not convinced of that, I don't know if I can help you, because I am so passionate about this. I hope you've picked up on that. Understanding and knowing your audience and knowing how they're going to interpret what you have to say. You may recognize this chart, and if you want to just draw that out there, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 circles, 5 encircling circles. And I said when we first started on Sunday morning that this is a cross-sectioning of a human being. This is a picture of your child. This is a picture of your spouse. This is a picture of me. This is a picture of everybody that's important to you. It is also a picture of a people group. And the reason that I say that, I can use this to help me to understand a person's personality, but a people group is nothing more than a collective personality. That's what a culture is. And so I can use this to help me to understand a person or I can use it to help me to understand. And then I told the story of Menkaye and Umpore. You remember that? And he goes to the other village among the Waorani, and he goes and he kills her. His wife has died, and so he kills her dad and her brothers, and he kidnaps her and brings her home to his house. And as he's telling the story, Umpore was sitting right there in the room, and she's looking at him like, "Oh, I love you so much. This is so romantic. This is so wonderful." And then when I turned around and looked at the Americans in the room, they're going, "Oh, they are just shocked." And so I said to Steve, could you just interrupt Menkaye at this point? Steve saying, could you just interrupt Menkaye at this point and ask him to just take a breath, because these people are traumatized right now. And there's a few things that I think I need to explain to them. Steve Saint and I, we have this ongoing argument between us as to who worked with the most violent people, because the Bukalut were headhunters, and heads were taken while we were there. The Waorani are ingrained killers, cultural killers. Both cultures demanded killing as a rite of passage, but these Americans didn't understand that, and so it took a little while. And when I explained it, this is how it works in their culture. There wasn't a single American that raised their hand and said, "Oh, I agree. I think that's the way culture ought to be done." Nobody said that. Nobody said, "I'm not married yet, but I'm planning to kill my girlfriend's father and his brothers so that, we can have this romantic moment too," because in our culture, it doesn't work like that ever. And so when he went on, he explained, and we asked, he's going out killing people so that he can get married. And so the first question that we want to ask when we want to get to know somebody is, what is done? When I'm traveling on an airplane, I want to share the gospel with the person that's sitting next to me. That's just kind of part of my heart. I don't always get to do that, but that's something that I want to do. And so I'll introduce myself. And, my name is Jay, and then you give me your name. We exchange names. And after we've exchanged names, what's always the next question? What's always the next question? What do you do? Right? What do you do? And if I ask you that question, what do you do, and you tell me, I'm starting to get to know you. If you say, I'm a brain surgeon who saves lives every day, well, that says something about you. If you say, well, I rob banks for a living, that says something about you too. And you're already giving me hints about what the gospel is going to look like when I talk to you. If you say, I'm a mathematician, well, that says something about you as well. If you say, I teach English, well, that says something. If you say, well, I'm a missionary and I work cross-culturally, ooh, that says something about you. And so as we continue to form this conversation, I remember one time sitting on an airplane, and I've gotten my seat already, and now there's a middle seat. There's another person in this seat, and the middle seat is empty. And so I'm watching the people that come down the aisle. And I'm able to say without any hesitation, that person will not sit next to me. That person will not sit. And then there's this, and then I'll say, that's the person that's going to sit next to me. And it's never the one who is skinny and tiny. It's always the one who is as large as I am, built for stability and high winds. They're the ones that settle into the middle seat. But on this particular occasion, the people are coming down the aisle, and there was this guy who, he had a hat on like he was from the 1940s, and he had this like crisp shirt on. He looked like he was about 22 years old, and he's kind of bouncing down the aisle, as he's coming, and got a little bit of a dance swagger in his walk. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, that guy's probably a liberal Democrat. That's who he is. He's going to be a liberal. I hope he doesn't sit next to me, because I don't know that we'll have enough in common to actually have a conversation. And doggone it, didn't he stand at the edge of that aisle and put his suitcase up and then say to the lady that was sitting, that's my seat right there. And so now he's sitting next to me, and I thought, how do I even begin the conversation with this guy who is so different from me? And so we started talking about, I asked him, do you go to church? Oh, yes, I go to church. And I thought, well, I wonder where he goes. Well, where do you go to, what were you doing here in the Philippines? Well, I was on mission here in the Philippines. Wait, time out. Oh yeah, we went and we worked with some poor people and we shared the gospel with them. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, but I didn't expect that based on how you look. He said, do you believe the gospel? I said, I do. I said, in fact, I've been in missions for a lot of years. And he said, oh, that is such a relief. I said, why? He said, because I got on the plane and I was looking and I knew my seat was coming up and I was afraid I was going to have to sit next to you. And you have a bald head and a beard and you're a big guy. And I just assumed that you were probably going to be mean. And we had judged each other by the cover. We judged the book by the cover. And both of us assumed it was going to be a very trying trip. But it turned out that this old missionary had the opportunity to sit with this young missionary and borrow some of his enthusiasm and borrow some of his encouragement, while I was able to share some of my wisdom and my experience with him. And it turned into just a wonderful time together. But it had everything to do with the way we look at the world, not the externals. So when we ask the question, what is done? What comes back to us is behavior. And behavior is the first hint. If you go visit somebody in their home and they have a 4-year-old child and the 4-year-old child walks over to you while you're sitting there in the chair and he lifts his leg like this and then just kicks you in the shin, you're going to make some assumptions, not only about the child, but about mom and dad, right? I mean, right away, you're going to think you understand a lot of things, and maybe you do, and maybe you don't, but behavior. And then I told a story about a deer and a snail. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands as to how many figured that out. I anticipated that the Chinese people in the room, forgive me for this, that the Chinese people in the room would take it pretty much the way the Americans, that when I tell the story, that the snail somehow cheated or, pushed the limits, or that he attached himself, rode on the deer. That's the way Americans look at it based on our worldview. But at the end, we talked about the fact that the father is trying to communicate to his son. Did you catch that all the way? The father is trying to communicate to his son that the family is more valuable than going out and being independent and striking out on your own. And so what we're asking now is the second question. As we're getting to know these people, we want to know what is good, what is best, what is good or what is best. And the answer that comes back is values. You're here this morning. I'm not going to ask how many wanted to be here. How about we do this? How many would rather be here this morning than on the beach in Boracay? I'm not going to put my hand up for that, right? How many would rather be here than checked into the best hospital in Makati? Oh yeah, I'll go for that. I don't want to be checked in the hospital at all. That has everything to do with values. You're here this morning not because this is the absolute best place that you could be. You're not here this morning for fun. You're here this morning because you're part of a missions conference. You're doing missions, and the church has asked you to sit and listen to this old guy from the United States of America. And because you value your relationship with the church, and because you value your ministry and what you're trying to accomplish, you've been willing to do that. So thank you very much. But values drive behavior. When you see a behavior, you can be sure that there is a value behind it. Always a value behind it. The next story that I told was the crying Dumagat baby. The adults, did that strike you when I said that the Barrio Capitan, the chieftain, said to me, we started shouting because the baby woke up. As an American, that's stupid. I mean, what a dumb way to look at forgive me for that. I hope there are no Dumagat here this morning. But as an American, that's my gut reaction. The baby woke up, so you started shouting? It seems like if you were shouting and the baby woke up, you would be quiet so the baby can go back to sleep. But they shouted until the baby fell asleep, which made no sense to me at all. Until I asked the question, what would happen if you didn't wake up and shout? And when he told me that the evil spirit would come and steal the soul of the baby, I sat back and thought, wow, if I were Dumagat, I would do the same thing. So the next question that we ask is, what is true? What is true? And the answer that comes back is beliefs. Those people believed that an evil spirit would steal the soul of their child if they didn't shout. And so because they value their child, they behaved in a way that would keep the evil spirits at bay. But you see how going deeper helps you to understand their behavior? You can't just watch their behavior and assume that you know why they're doing that. You have to understand what value they're addressing by what they do and what belief is driving that. And then I told the Agta creation story, and I had to apologize to my friend Ernie after that, because it really looked like he was going to be quite amused, as the story progressed, and because he figured out where it was going and knew that this and the hands and what a great story, isn't it? I sat there and listened to that story when I asked an Agta man to tell me. I sat there and listened to that story and thought, this is such a good story. I'm going to have to tell this to other people. But what we're talking about there, the question that drew that, the question that drew that is, what is real? What is real for you? And the answer that comes back is worldview. The Agta really are the poorest of the poor here in the Philippines. They own no land. They struggle to get jobs. When they do get a job working for some Filipino, they get paid half as much as other people who are on the team who are Filipinos. They're considered to be, and actually with their own in their own language, the word Agta is an insult. It's an insult. If an Agta man does something stupid, something foolish, his Agta friends will look at him and say, "What are you, Agta or something?" And I've had Agta men tell me, "I'm not really a man, I'm just an Agta." I've heard that more than once. That's the idea that they have of themselves. That's how they see themselves. And it's inside of their beliefs. They don't believe that believing anything is going to change. They'll believe almost anything because they know that you're smarter than they are. Their values are driven, their behavior is driven, and at the heart there is their creation story. They claim in their creation story that they were not diligent, and that's why they got there so late. And they believe themselves to be not diligent. And I'm not sure whether the story came from the lack of diligence or the lack of diligence came from the story, but I really truly believe that their worldview prevents them from understanding the gospel when you present it. And then the story that I told is, my name is not really Jay, my name is John. And I came to believe that because my mom waited to name me and then read the Bible and said, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. She looked at this tiny infant over there that she didn't want. In the 21st century, I was an abortion waiting to happen in the United States of America. I don't believe my mother would have ever done that, but if there's ever a child that was sent from God, it's this one. That was her reasoning. And she told me that story over and over and over again. And then I went to a missions conference as a 7-year-old and discovered that they needed missionaries to go and take the gospel. And I thought to myself, that's a job for a man who has been sent by God. That's why I'm here today. I continue to believe that. I hope you believe that. I hope you believe that you are a man or a woman who has been sent by God to that people group. I hope that's why you're there. And so on the inside, the question is, what happened? What happened to me was my mom told me this story. The answer that comes back is the story. And my story drove me into missions. My story drove me into missions. What happened to me and what I tell myself about it. Now let me stop there because we've already had like 40 minutes on. We're going to have some Q&A if you've got some more questions. But before we do that, would you stand with me? We need to do an exercise because I understand I'm just up here talking, but we need to do an exercise. And here's what I want you to do. I've asked you to do this before if you were here in 2019. I want you to take the index finger of your right hand and put it on your nose. Take the index finger of your left hand and put it on your right ear. And in a moment, I'm going to say, switch. And when I say switch, I want you, I did not say switch. When I say switch, I want you to take your hands down, put your right hand outside your left hand and put it on your left ear. You ready? All right, here we are. Ready, switch, 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 switch. Oh, sit down. What happened to you just now? That was awful. But I think it's probably a good idea if you just stretch instead of switching, and don't try not to wander too far away because it's too hard to get people to come back. Everybody stretching. Yes, 3 deep breaths to dispel the sleep and the tension. You know, I've had this coffee up here the whole time. Oh, they gave me cold coffee. All right. I see people need to use let's let people use the restroom so that they won't stay out here and, well, you know. But maybe we could ask, does anybody have any questions about this? We're going to be dismantling this and putting it back together over the next over the next hours that we have together. But does anybody have any questions about this, about Sunday morning? Yes, sir. That's an excellent question. I hope that we have time to get far enough into this to talk about guilt, shame, and fear. Those are the 3 basic building blocks of every culture. And in any given family, one of the children quite possibly is more guilt-driven than anything else. One of them is more shame-driven than anything else. One of them is more fear-driven than anything else. But collectively, when you collect the personality to get take the collective personality, the worldview of the people group, you can make certain assumptions about the weight of guilt, shame, and fear based on the basic components of the culture. For example, Filipinos tend to be shame culture. And you discover that when you're you discover that when you stop at a red light at 3 o'clock in the morning. That is, if you stop at a red light at 3 o'clock in the morning. You may stop there, you may not stop there. You may say it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm just going to go through. Filipinos, something doesn't really become bad until somebody catches you doing it, right? It's the police officer. You'll actually stop and you'll look, not to see if there's traffic coming, but is there a buayo? You know, is there a police officer that might catch me while I'm making this crossing. And if there's no police officer, if there's no way for you to be caught, then it's more likely that you will. American culture, German culture, many of the European cultures are actually guilt cultures. And so based on the guilt that you're going to feel, I have sat at red lights at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the light isn't changing and the light isn't changing. And so I'll pull a little further forward and a little further forward. And it has nothing to do with nobody coming. It has to do with the fact that that red light means stop. And that's the way I was trained as a child. So guilt is a primary driver in my culture. And that would be true generally of Americans. We are cusping now as Americans, we are cusping into a fear culture. Animists, tribal people, people groups out there who have only recently emerged into Filipino culture are going to be animists, not religious people, but animists. And animistic cultures are always driven by fear. They are afraid of what the middle level spirits will do to them. If we have time, we'll get into animism and we'll talk about that. But as you get to know the individuals in the culture, you're going to see patterns. The more people you interview, the more people that you talk to, and it may be that you personally are more driven by guilt than you are by shame. But then I talk to your brothers and your sisters and your mom and dad, and I discover that they're more driven by shame. Chinese people are an interesting mix. They are actually emerging from animism, and animistic cultures, when they emerge into shame cultures. And so depending on how long they've been part of the world in general, deep Chinese culture is very animistic, because we believe that the stars have will and force, that particular dates, this is the day that I'm going to be engaged, and this is the day I'm going to be married, because we've feng shui and movement and energy and yin and yang. All of those are examples of animism. But the Chinese culture has emerged into the modern world and have begun to cusp into a shame culture. Americans are cusping into a fear culture. And I know that if you go and visit, how many have visited the United States and watched television there? We have this thing called the Learning Channel. You know what the Learning Channel is mostly about in the evenings? Ghost hunters. And is Bigfoot real? And we are moving in the direction of fear. Guilt cultures move in the cusp into fear. Fear cultures cusp into shame. Shame cultures cusp into guilt. So you're looking for patterns. That's what we're saying. And when you understand the basic patterns that are there, you're able to make certain educated assumptions about how to craft the message. And really what it is we're trying to figure out how to use the stories that are available to us from God's Word to explain who God is and what redemption is and all of that. But that's a long question to a short answer. But anyone else? Any other questions? All right. Some people are still gone. Who knows where they got lost in the process here, but I don't blame you. If you feel like you need to stand up, please do. I'd rather have you do that than go to sleep. I always feel so threatened when you fall asleep. Just so you know, I'm not going to be angry at you, but if you're sleeping, my goal is not to put you to sleep. That's not, I didn't wake up this morning and say, God, please help me to put them to sleep because they need a nap. I didn't do that, but I know you need a nap, especially if you've been in ministry. So let's go back to walking through the forest. All right? We're walking through the forest, and as we're making our way through the forest, with my friend, he spins around as we come into the garden, and he says, "Shh, be quiet, be quiet." We're quiet as we walk through the garden, and then we're talking again once we get to the other side. Now, would it be safe to say, do you think, that it's important for me to know what just happened? It's important for me to know what. So how do I get underneath that? How do I get inside of that? How do I come to understand that? It's a little bit like that paragraph that I read to you from this book, right? You had an experience that was isolated from everything else you've ever experienced. But it means something. And if you'll take the time to get underneath it, you'll understand the culture better. So if we work through it from outside in, what are the first kind of questions that I'm going to ask? They're going to be about the behavior itself. Somebody help me to know what kind of questions I might want to ask. What kind of questions might I want to ask about behavior? What's that? Yeah, but why do we have to be quiet when we're going through the garden? And the answer that's going to come back to that is most likely going to be because we were coming through the garden. And you're supposed to be quiet as you're coming through the garden. So I might want to start asking, are there other gardens? Is this the only garden? Because that might be an important question. I'm going to want to pay attention because I know along the trail there's another garden, and I'm going to watch and see if we have to be quiet in that garden too, because that might make a difference. It might make a difference. How quiet do we have to be? Can we whisper? Can we? And by the time I have the answers to all of those questions in terms of the behavior itself, do I understand? Does anybody now know why we have to be quiet in the garden? Nope. I can tell you have to be quiet in every garden. To this day, there are other things that you can't do in the garden, even though they're followers of Jesus. If a woman is experiencing that time of month, she can't go into the garden. She can't work there, even though she's the primary one who works there. And the further you get into it, the more you realize this is an important part of their culture. It says something about them. All right, from the values place, what kind of questions could I ask to get underneath the values, to begin to explore the values that he's expressing by being quiet in the garden? Anybody? What kind of questions would I ask? Yes, it's the same question that you remember what I asked of the Barrio Capitan about yelling when the child is awake? How did I phrase that question? What would happen if we're not quiet in the garden? Well, then I will respond to you. Well, if we're not quiet in the garden, then we might offend Eoma. Does that help you to understand? Still something that I'm not sure about here. We might offend Eoma. Yep. Is there anything that you want to know relative to what I believe about Eoma? Anybody? Anybody have a question? Does anybody know who Eoma is? Well, I do. I know who Eoma is. Does anybody recognize the word Oma? Yes, because it's one of the Austro-Malay core words. It's Kaingan. It's your rice field, your garden, up there on the side of the mountain. And Oma. Well, because I speak Bukalod, I know that A means from the. You are A Manila. You're from Manila. So Eoma is somebody. It's a person who is from the garden. In fact, one of the words that the Bukalot used to describe themselves, Bukalot is what they call their language in culture. Sometimes they'll look at you and say, "Igongot ak, igongot ak." And igongot in Tagalog is from, in English, is from the forest. Tagagubat. Igongot, tagagubat. I always have trouble going between Bukalot and Tagalog. So I know that whoever this is, it's somebody from the garden. So now do you understand? Now, What other questions might you ask in terms of beliefs? Who's Aoma? Have I ever met Aoma? Have you ever seen Aoma? Was Aoma there in the garden? And the answers that are going to come back to that are going to be we don't know if Aoma was there in the garden. But just in case Aoma is there, we have to be careful. Well, have you ever seen Aoma? Nope, nobody. Can you see Aoma? Nope, nobody can. You know what I bet I'm dealing with here? I bet I'm dealing with a spirit. In the spirit of animism, I believe I'm dealing with a spirit at this point. And so I'm going to ask questions that help me to understand what he believes about Aoma. And let me just warn you at this point, once you open that box, you are going to be the most discouraged person on the planet. I mean, you really, truly are. Because those middle-level spirits in an animistic setting are so vitally important and so complex. When I would ask questions about the spirit world, when I first got there, all the people said to me, well, you need to go and talk to Tupdak. Tupdak was a man that I knew well. He had lost his leg. He was an elder in one of the churches about an hour and a half walk away. And so I sent word over to him, I'd like to come and talk to you about the spirit world. Tupdak was a shaman. He was a practitioner of the spirit world and understood it in ways. His father had been a very powerful practitioner, very powerful shaman. His brother was a shaman. His kids and his brother's kids were all shaman. They were given pieces of this spirit. And bear with me for just a second here. One of the things that I've seen happen regularly in tribal settings, in animistic settings, and animism is much more prevalent here in Asia than you might realize. He may live in the city. He may have a fine Barong Tagalogon. He may drive a Mercedes. But underneath it all beats the heart of an animist. We need to be alert to this. Antig-antig and all the other things that we keep in our purse just for the sake of safekeeping. Medals that we wear and statues that we keep around our house are all leftovers from the transition from animism to the traditional religion here in the Philippines. And we'll stop the mic when it comes time to talk about that. But animism is so very, very common. But they all said, you've got to go talk to Tupdak. I spoke the language fluently, and so was able to go. And I actually took a notebook with me and walked an hour and a half. It's an hour and a half hike from my house to his house, and you climb mountains and you cross rivers. And I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere, and there are no people in that hour and a half walk. You're walking between villages. And so I arrived at his house, and we sat down, and his wife brought us some ulang kayu, some kamoting kahoy that had been roasted by the fire, and a little bit of rice, and she set it out in front of us. But it's not common to start with the meal. You start with why you've come. And so we sat in this little bahay kubo, and with split bamboo, woven split bamboo for walls, and either kawayan or rattan, down on the split rattan, down on the floor. And now we're sitting in his house, and I'm leaning against the wall, and he's leaning against the wall. And I said, so I came to talk to you about the spirit world. And he said, well, what do you want to know about the spirit world? And I very foolishly said, everything. Because you're the guy that knows. You're the guy that... I didn't say it out loud. I've come here with the message of the gospel. And I intend at some point to teach you the book of Romans. I intend to teach you Ephesians. And I know if those things are going to be meaningful to you, I'm going to have to use a logic style that you're familiar with, but I'm going to have to speak to your worldview. Change though it may be because you are now believers, there are still remnants of that left behind. And so he started, and I started taking notes. And it's not easy to take notes in English when you're having a conversation in Bukalo, just so you know. But I'm taking notes, and I have to keep going. with my pen because it keeps catching on fire. And, and now I'm writing more. And he began to tell me about Matan Mailag, Binangunan, creator God who set the universe into being, who created all things and created people. And by the way, their creation story has to do with us descending from monkeys for what it's worth. I tell that story in the United States and I say, I just need you to know that they believe the same thing that the typical American does, but they had it first. They had it long before we had Darwin. I'm just saying. We descended from monkeys but then Binangunan, Matan Mailag, and they're not the same, but they're kind. Matan Mailag, the eye of the sun. Matan Mailag means the eye of the sun. Binangunan just kind of disinvolved himself with people. And it was the middle level spirits that took over. And in the middle level spirits, there's Paladsiakan. I'm not sure that we could see that particular star at night here in Manila with all the ambient light, but there's a particular star where Paladsiakan lives. There are spirits that live in the waters. There are spirits that live in banyan trees. There are spirits that live, and the spirits, they can ruin your world. One of the spirits is named Eoma. Oh, and when he said that, I thought, here we go. Eoma watches over the garden. Eoma watches over the garden. And you never know whether Eoma is going to be there. By the way, Eoma, a practitioner or shaman can see Eoma. She's very short. She's the only one of the middle-level spirits that's female. She's very, very short. Well, I don't want to say she's the only female, but she's very, very short and very, very quiet. And if you're in the garden, you're depending on her to take care of the garden. And I thought, well, now I'm really writing notes because I'm getting answers to these questions. And then he told me about Wana. How many have ever seen the sky red in the morning or at night? That's Wana. That's Wana. And it's Wana who helps the shaman to know how to heal sickness. And when I go to the shaman already knows that I'm coming. I don't have to tell him my symptoms or anything. He's able to tell me the symptoms that I'm having, and then he's able to prescribe an offering that I need to make so that Agimang will no longer be angry at me. Wana is nice and really helps people. Agimang is taller than a house. He has a beard. He is ugly. And if he meets you on the trail, he will kill you. Period. If he meets you on the trail, he will kill you. He told me stories about people that they had found dead, and it's so gruesome I don't even want to relate that story to you. Agimang, taller than a house, has a beard, and actually has a female companion. There's a spirit, they don't know much about her, but she goes with him, and this world just kind of exploded, and I began to realize I don't understand these people at all. This man is a believer. He's an elder in the church. And when we got all done, he said what Bukala would always say at the end of a message or the end of a conversation. He leaned back against the wall. He took some ulangkazu, some kamoting kahoy, and said right before he popped it in his mouth, "Samanalagam. That is all that I will say about that." And I can't tell you how discouraged I was at that moment. Because I had come here to share the gospel with them. I had come here to teach about God, to teach godliness, to teach them how to walk with Jesus, how to relate to Creator God, who in their estimation is distant and just divorced himself from people at some point. And they have to appease the spirits and do the dance right. And I was so confused. And then he said, he swallowed that first bite, and I love this part. He swallowed that first bite and he said, sometimes they still show themselves to me. I said, who shows themselves to you? He said, the spirits. So I said, oh, well, what do they look like? He said, they look like spirits. You idiot. Look like spirits, I wrote in my notebook. I could show you these notes. They look like spirits. And so I said to him, well, how do they appear? And he explained some of the ways they appear. And my next question was, so what do you do when they show themselves to you? And he said this to me, well, I just keep walking and I ignore them. Anybody see any problems with that approach to the spirit world? Agimung, by the way, is probably Satan. He's the highest of the spirits. He's the highest of the spirits. It's probably Satan. There are issues with Agimung because he never comes into the village. And so people weren't understanding how temptation works unless I'm on the trail. He kept the Bukalot up there in their territory because if they met him on the trail, they would he would kill them. And so they couldn't go down into the lowlands where they might hear the good news. And because they were headhunters, no missionaries were going up there with the good news. He kept them in a prison of darkness until some of God's people went up there and shared the good news, found a way to share the good news in that context. So does anybody have a problem with I just ignore them? What would you say about that? Is that okay? Is that a good strategy? Is that a good way? Well, let me quote some scripture to you, okay? Beware of your enemy, the devil. He is like a roaring lion, looking for whom he may devour, looking for someone to devour. Ignore him, and he will flee from you. Is that what it says? Does it say, ignore him, and he will flee from you? What does it say? Resist him, and he will flee from you. Well, now it's started to get dark, and I'm going to make my way home. And so, I get on the trail, and it's getting darker and darker. And I'm crossing the rivers and climbing the mountains, and there's not another human being anywhere around. I don't have a flashlight because I knew it was going to be a full moon. And so you can see the trail in the dark. And can I suggest to you that world changed significantly after the story that he told me? I'm already starting to wonder, what if Agimung shows up? What if and so, I actually had to stop there on the trail in the dark and step into the presence and say, you are an unimaginable God. There is no God like you, Father, and help me to move with courage through this situation, but please help me to understand it, because I was so discouraged at that moment. Because I'd come to teach God's word to these people, and it occurred to me at that moment that I had no idea who they were. I had no idea what made them tick. But I knew that I didn't want to do what missionaries do. And this is the strategy that I was warning you about at the beginning of this story. Most missionaries in that situation will say, if I come to a missionary, if I'm tribal or I'm an animist, and I come to a missionary and say, I'm having trouble with the evil spirits, the standard answer to that question is, the evil spirits are not real. So the problems that you're having with them are not real problems. And that's where they come away with, just ignore. And I don't want to go all I don't want to go all Twilight Zone on you. But the evil spirits are real. We have it in vivid context from God's word, that the evil spirits are real. Saul was in the habit of losing his temper. Nobody thought he was mentally incapacitated. Nobody thought he was suffering from mental illness. They assumed that he was what? Being bothered by an evil spirit. So what did they do? They went and found somebody who could play the harp, the lyre, skillfully. And that's how David came into Saul's life. Because David was there to play worship songs that would dispel the evil spirits. They took that for granted. The evil spirits are real. They are not as real as the tribal people think they are, but they are far more real than you think they are. Let me say that again. They are not as real as the tribal people think they are, but they are far more real than you think they are. And when they come to you and they say, I'm having difficulty, I'm afraid of this, or I'm afraid of that, or I'm having difficulty with this evil spirit, and you say, the evil spirits don't exist, that would be very like me coming to you, forgive me for this, it would be very like me coming to you and saying, I'm having a terrible time with my car. I get up some mornings and it won't start. And it's full of gas and it just won't start. And so I end up having to take Grab to work. And then the next morning when I come, it starts. It's driving me crazy. And so you look at me and you say, oh, Jay, you need to understand that your car is not real. And so the problems that you are having with your car are not real. My car's down there in the parking lot. What are the chances that when I have other issues in my life and I'm looking for advice, I'm looking for truth, what are the chances that I'm going to come to you if you tell me that this thing that I've seen with my own eyes is not real? Please don't do that. Please understand the people that you are teaching. And please don't be surprised when they don't know how to walk with God based on the image that they have of God, if you don't teach through to the center. That's all we're talking about. So, all that to say, how many feel like you understand Eoma better now than you did before? You understand how he believes. And if you take the time, if you take the time to get in underneath his beliefs, then you're going to understand his worldview. What's the difference between worldview and beliefs? I tried to explain that rather briefly on Sunday morning. What's the difference between worldview and beliefs? Well, it's the difference between what is true, that's beliefs, and what is real, that's worldview. What is true and what is real? My belief system has to be maintained. I have to read God's word. I have to spend time in prayer. I have to talk to other believers about what we believe so that I can be strengthened in my faith. My worldview does not have to be maintained. And we'll do this again just to see how well you were listening on Sunday morning. I'm holding this, and they're going to panic because they think I'm going to drop this. I'm holding this between my thumb and forefinger. If I open my thumb and forefinger, how many of you believe that it will hit the floor? How many of you believe that it will hit the floor? How many of you believe that? And you're not afraid to say that? No. Sorry. You don't believe, now it really is getting close to the time. You don't believe that it will hit the floor. You expect that it will hit the floor. If I open my fingers and it just hovers there, you're not going to say, I wonder if gravity is different there. No. What goes up must come down. We know that. That's just part of, and if something stays up in the air, you're going to say, what Jay's doing a trick or something up there. And I wish I could learn a magic trick where I could just let go of it. And because but I haven't managed to sort that out just yet. That's the difference between worldview and belief. And I want you to understand that worldview is deeper than belief. And I'll say this out loud. Whenever worldview and belief come into conflict in a people group over a long period of time, worldview wins out every time. What is real always takes precedence over what is true. And we can describe that. We can explain that. If I'm up here teaching about the love of God, I wish they'd invite me back to talk about the love of God. I love talking about God's love and the way he relates to us because of his love from Ephesians chapter 3. I just absolutely love those verses. But if I'm standing up here talking to you about the love of God and you get a phone call that says, you should come home quickly, your father has just died. That's going to make my words about the love of God sound very hollow. If God loves me, then why can't I? If God loves me, then why did I get COVID? If God loves me, then why did I lose my father? If God loves me, then why did my grandmother just die before? We balance beliefs against worldview, and over a long period of time, worldview wins out. There's one more thing that we have to add here. Let's see if there's, I actually have Q&A slated for the end of this, and so we'll be able to take a couple of minutes. At the very center here, we have the story. You remember that. Do you remember the story that I told? It was a story about me and the fact that my name is John, and that impacted me because of what happened. Let's imagine that I come to you and I say, my house burned down last night. Let's just say I live nearby, and I say my house burned down last night. And you're going to look at me and you're going to say, oh, my goodness, you're going to have some questions, right? Is everybody all right? Is your wife okay? Are your children okay? Yes, we all got out. Were you able to save any of your stuff? No, it is all completely destroyed. Well, if you're my friend, you're going to commiserate with me. You're going to tell me how sorry you are. But then you're going to say, what happened? And that's when I do this. And I say, well, I don't like to say this, but I smoke cigars. I don't smoke cigars. But let's just imagine that I say that. I smoke cigars. But it's only one time of the day when I smoke cigars. They help me to relax before I go to sleep. And so I like to smoke a cigar before. None of this is true, okay? Don't go complaining about me being here because he smokes cigars. I don't smoke cigars, but I smoke cigars. And so I always smoke cigars before bed, and then I put the cigar out. But last night when I got into bed, I was more tired than I realized, and I was laying there smoking my cigar, and I fell asleep. The bed caught on fire, the sheets caught on fire, the bed caught on fire. My wife and I, we had to run out, and we got the kids, but we're all safe. But now the house has burned down. If you are my friend, having heard that story, I know what you're going to say. I bet you won't ever do that again, right? Because you will assume that what happened to me changed me, changed the way I do life. And that's why I say the story lies at the center. What happened to me and what I tell myself about it is my story. And if you want to change me, you cannot change me by getting me to behave differently. You can only change me by changing my story. We'll talk about that starting tomorrow. It is 4 seconds past 11:30 according to my watch. Are there any questions or comments? We are going to take this apart tomorrow and talk about an approach that will reach into the story of the people that you are trying to reach. But are there any questions or comments? Thoughts or ideas? Oh, I see what you're doing. I applaud. Jay, we want to get to lunch. So, and forgive me for that. I don't blame you at all. But we'll give some time for questions and comments tomorrow morning when we start and before we get into that. But in the meantime, thank you for your patience with this old American, and forgive me if I said anything that offended you. That certainly wasn't my goal. But I hope that by the time we're done, I hope that I haven't entertained you. I hope that I've made you think. That's really what I want to do in the course of ministry. God bless you. We'll meet again tomorrow. And please remember, tomorrow night, you're going to know things that nobody else knows. Don't give those things away, but be a booster in the learning. Thank you so much.